Hey, how's it going? So, I am.
Hey, how's it going?
I got asked a little bit ago on Periscope, do you
So,
watch porn? And I thought that this would be
I am. Hey, how's it going?
worthwhile to look at and deal with. All right, so the answer is yes and no. What? How can you say that? Well, for starters, in case you were thinking that you were coming here to see Jesus, I'm not him. I'm a sinful human being. Now, I'm not saying that what I consider porn is what you consider porn. There's an author named Lois McMastery Bujold, and she's famous for saying she summed this up really good in an article called "Writing Sex." Everybody's turn on is somebody else's turn off, but that does not matter. What I really wanted to talk to you about is this question was a really good opportunity to kind of dig into the what and the why, and in my case, the why not. Because there's a lot of extremes. There's the, everything sex is bad, which I've never actually heard from anybody in religion, but everybody who's outside of Christianity thinks that Christians think, and we don't. And then there's the, um, everything sexual is good, so go for it, which everybody think, which doesn't work very well either. So, this is this is where things get kind of interesting. Is the reality falls somewhere in between. Um, why is this worth talking about? For the love of God, Bruce, why are you talking about pornography on a Christian channel? Well, one, sex and morality and life is a big thing. It's a big part of. It's a big part. Sex and life is a big part of Christianity, right? I mean, the very first thing that God ever says to people in the Bible is sexual. Look, there's the whole world. Fill it. Go. Guess what, man? That is that's talking about sex because it's actually reproduce and multiply and conquer the world. So Christianity actually cares about sex, and it isn't just bad, bad, bad. But if we're going to talk about it, then we're going to talk about porn too. And the Bible's pretty clear on this kind of stuff. But I don't want to start with the Bible. I actually want to start with real life, right? Because the guy who actually asked me this isn't huge into talking religion, and this is a point that I don't think I really have to dig into religion to talk about. Um, so, uh, I was just doing some research this morning, hanging around on Snapchat while I was not Snapchat, that was Periscope, um, and by the age of 14, um, the average age of exposure to pornography nowadays is like 11. Thank you, internet. 10 years before, in the mid 90s, it was 15. Um, and people, and the by the age of 14, by the end of the 14th year, 76.8%, according to an NYU study of self-reported from kids who were attending a four-year college. 76.8% of them were masturbating to orgasm by the end of their 14th year. So how sex happens, and then I dig into the Sexual Man, which is the Heart Report by Dr. Archibald Hart, which deals with sexuality inside of the Christian church and inside among believers. And I find out, and I found out what I was doing. What I found out with my research is that um, the frequency of masturbation only changes when you get married, in that sometimes the people would masturbate gets replaced with having sex. But if you're not having sex more than you were already wanking when you were a kid, you're still wanking, you know? So the question of porn is a relevant one, whether you're 12 or 20, or you're 20 minutes from death. Because having, my dad's 90. Let me tell you, he's still not dead. Oh, sometimes though, I wish he didn't tell me as much as I needed to hear about how much he's not dead. All right, so do I watch porn? I try not to, and here's why not. Um, Having a sexual life is not porn. Is not, you don't need it, right? There is such a thing as sex without pornography. If you're single, there's such a thing as either not doing anything and not using porn, or not, doing stuff and not using porn. Either way, you don't. So that because you can have a sex life without pornography, the question becomes, should you? And I want to explain why my take on this is no, or at least that's my decision for myself. Now, do I always follow through on this really well? No, I screw up or around, depending on how you want to view it. I kind of look at it as cheating. Um, like if you're married, of course, and you're using pornography, at least in your heart and in your head, you're cheating on your wife. And if you're not married yet, you're cheating whoever you're going to be married to. What? I'm not married. I don't have any. Commitments to anybody yet. But the thing is, the actions that you're taking now, the sexual patterns, the decisions that you make now, you're going to be bringing those into your marriage. It isn't just like eating a burger where it gets digested and it's gone. Um, we have the brain forms patterns, right? You have particularly, like young people, like as soon we don't come pre-programmed. This is something your health class totally lied to you about, right? We aren't born with a set registry of what we're going to be attracted to and what's going to turn us on. That gets learned. And that's something that as we make sexual choices in life, we teach ourselves, we reinforce things. I want to say on one hand or on the other, but given the topic matter, it probably won't be the best phrasing. Um, if I choose either to have no fantasies or to have fantasies about supporting, nurturing, and sharing, and affirming a mutual, joyous, sexual expression, then that's a pattern that I'm establishing in my head every time I use it. If if I'm going to have a fantasy at all. If I use porn, though, what patterns am I reinforcing? And you are reinforcing this. Why? Because pornography involves orgasms, right? We don't watch pornography to judge the artwork. Let's be blunt. People watch pornography because if they're not doing it right then they're going to be thinking about it later. But pornography is about masturbation or sexual arousal if you're a lady and you don't masturbate. And so the patterns that you're setting every time you do or don't use porn, you are making a choice, you're seeing a pattern, and then there's this orgasm or this sexual arousal that takes that pattern and stamps it into your brain. Um, and now, what are the patterns that get reinforced when you choose pornography? And are they good patterns to bring forward to your marriage or to bring forward to the woman that you're eventually going to love in life? Pornography has the message that women are about sex. And really, everybody has a life and sex is part of it. But even if you're completely sexually obsessed, there's only so much sex you can have in life. And sexuality is an expression of the other parts about you if you're doing it in a good, healthy way. Um, there's the idea that women just always want sex, right? That women are always ready or wanting it. And that's another bad thing from pornography because you train your brain with these multiple uses of this pattern getting stamped in with all the reinforcement of sexual reward that masturbation brings. And the more you repeat these patterns, the more these ideas get imprinted in your head, and the harder it is to change. The deeper the ruts get in your brain, um, and then get married, you get into a real relationship, and you find out that life doesn't really work that way. Real human beings get tired, or they're not in the mood, and that's okay. Um, Real sex doesn't look anything like what happens in pornography, and real women don't look anything like the airbrushed, silicone injected. People. Porn stars have like a career. They're mostly barely legal. 25, I gather, is old for them, and yet we're going to get married. We're going to have share life with people. Gravity is going to happen. Babies are going to happen. Burger King exists. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. See, if you're avoiding pornography, there's this thing in human sexuality called imprinting, right? Where if you went as a virgin to your wedding bed, basically the imprinting is the very first serious impressions. They last, they stick, they set a pattern that stays fixed mostly for the rest of your life. There's an example in Dr. Archibald Hart's book, The Sexual Man, of a 13-year-old kid who his cousin that he thought was pretty left some black underwear after a family reunion, and he stole them. And just holding them was enough to bring him to orgasm when he was 13 and 14, and eventually he'd hold them and jerk off. But this pattern became so fixed that by the time he got married, he wasn't able to have sex with his wife or even be aroused unless she was wearing black panties. Now, that's an extreme example, but it's an example of the way that the decisions that we make about the sexual fantasies and the things that we watch, and the ideas that we have behind sex, they get locked in, and the more things are repeated, the more firmly they get locked in, and the harder it is to change. And pornography sets up all these patterns that are destructive to marriage. I mean, in the 90s, I was part of a movement called Promise Keepers, and I would listen to married guys. Now, I'm single, but I would hear, and I would read the stories, and I would hear people talk about their lives where pornography destroyed their marriage. They spent all of puberty and their college age jerking off to porn, where women always wanted to. I got asked if I can see the comments. Yes, I can see the comments. Um, uh, Women are always ready, and sex is always the solution, and that's like the one of the messages of pornography. And when he got married, his wife occasionally needed to, his wife wanted things to be okay in their relationship before she could be sexually active with him. And it was always easier to go back to porn, where the fake women always wanted it right away, and he was always good enough. And instead of sticking around and doing the real work that is involved in having a healthy relationship. And I'm not saying this guy was a jerk. He was a normal guy. But he had set so much momentum, right? He picked a direction and he reinforced it and reinforced it and reinforced it and reinforced it. And this association got rolling in his head. And by the time he got married, it had so much speed that it steamrollered right over his actual relationship. That's you exaggerating. Okay, three quarters of guys are regularly masturbating by the time they're 14. The average is 15 times 15 times a month before marriage, drops to like 13 to 12 after marriage. But so let's say you're the average Joe Blow, right? You start your exposure to pornography is right around the time you hit puberty. You start masturbating at 14 or 13. You doing it, 15 times a week, 15 times a month, 12 months a year. You get married relatively early at 24. That's 1,832 times you've imprinted this pattern in your head that's completely opposite of what your marriage needs. So every time every time that I fail, every time that I would watch pornography, I'm wiring myself to be a failure as a husband. I'm making it harder for me to, if God does provide me with a wife, I'm making it harder for me to be the mate that she needs. I'm making every time that I would jerk off to porn, I'm setting off this. I'm setting this one. My brain, this imprint tells me what is beautiful. If you look at old artwork from 200 years ago, um, you see these big fat women because everybody was starving, and so to have food was really awesome and exotic. So a woman with flesh was really interesting, which is why, like in the 1700s, there were all these naked pictures of what we would say fat woman, like, oh my gosh, get a treadmill, because everybody's fat nowadays. But that was never not interesting to them because this was what was presented as beauty. Their body learned it, it got reinforced, and by the time they were married, there you go. Now, if I didn't bring that imprint to marriage, if I came free of these patterns, then God built me, or evolution designed it, whichever way you want to talk about it. The pattern is that I'd be imprinting on my wife, that my wife would become my definition, my living definition of what's beautiful. And that's really awesome. To be programmed that your wife defines sexy is something that is going to help you be more faithful to her, pay her more attention, pay more attention to what her needs are, be more romantic with her, not just to get sex from her, but that's part of the whole deal. And every time that I turn to an idea outside of that to get sexual fulfillment, I'm not just being selfish, right? Because if I'm not in a relationship, that might not be such a big deal. But I'm setting this pattern, I'm cheating her of some of how God designed, or some of how I was designed, whoever designed me, some of how I was designed to be her mate and to be her partner. And if I'm going to get married, I want to do it right. Then there's the harm that it does to me, right? It Pornography is all about your own. Using pornography is all about your feelings, and in actual sex, there's another person involved. Um, you hear this plague of problems of premature ejaculation, and there's the problems like I cited in the example I got from Dr. Hart's book, where you know you get programmed enough that the impossibly beautiful momentary levels of attractiveness that you see in pornography is remotely real, then it's hard to find your wife beautiful compared to people who have $50,000 in reconstructive surgery, because she's not probably going to do that for you, and if she does, she's not going to be very happy with you for very long. So just leaving God completely out of it, and there's other things like pornography is one of the main sources of computer viruses. That if you get known as somebody who uses porn, it's not going to really get you a lot of respect from your friends. Maybe in the eighth grade or something, but in real life and in the long term, it does not it doesn't earn you respect. It doesn't show respect to the woman you're dating or the woman you're going to marry, and it can destroy and short circuit your sex life by crossing these circuits in your brain with how healthy sexual function is supposed to be, with this really warped version. But you'll get so stuck with hundreds and thousands of repetitions of the wrong way when you need to make that 90-degree turn to have a healthy sex life with somebody else who deserves your respect. Every time that you reinforce a bad fantasy or an inappropriate desire or use pornography, you are you're building all the momentum going the wrong way. And the pain and the loss involved when either you have how much effort it takes to turn around to be a healthy and loving mate and father and husband, and or what happens more often is that you fail to make the turn and you're a wreck as a mate and a husband. Um, I have a sinful nature. I'm not an inherently good person. I'm not super wise. I'm not super disciplined. I'm not super anything. But I can make the decision not, I can decide whether I'm going to feed that problem or if I'm going to fight the problem. Now, if you fail or if you have failed, um, we can talk about forgiveness. We can talk about healing. Um, I spent a couple years actually doing volunteer prison ministries with sex offenders, right? I can talk about sex. It's really not a hard thing for me. And if I can deal with their issues, that being said, there's plenty of help out there from professionals. And probably if I put this up, I'm going to put a couple recommendations down there. But the pros to porn: feels good, it's readily available, there's no risk of rejection, feels good. Nobody has to know, yeah, right, because those stories never find out. Those things aren't worth the downside of cheating my wife out of me being a good mate to her, short-circuiting my own, setting my own sexual circuitry up with cross wires and failures, learning to depend on a false standard so that nobody can measure up, which can help me which can set me up to stay single, and it can wreck my marriage. Learning how to turn to pornography to feel better, like a drug, instead of dealing with life's challenges, hurting my reputation among people, and injuring my self-respect, and because I'm, a medieval Christian, damaging my relationship with God because, hey, it's a sin. Pornography is clearly and unabashedly, the Bible says nothing one way or the other about masturbation at all. But sexual immorality, of which the word porn actually comes from, that it talks about it all, and it's black and white, and it's all black on that one. It's all darkness. So for the sake of any future wife, for the sake of my own sexual health, for the sake of my reputation, for the sake of my mental health, for the sake of my spiritual health, those are the reasons that outweigh feels good, is easy, there's no risk of rejection, and all that porn offers. So that's why, in the end, I don't do this perfectly, but the goal and the mission is to not use pornography. Okay, if I get enough feedback on this one, if I get comments that are, then I'm probably going to do a follow-up video on this and take this from the religious side, because I have not been really coming at this from the Christianity side. I have just come at this from psychology, biology, and relationships, which are real life. There's a political commentator and a screenwriter named Andrew Klavan who's freaking hilarious. And he pointed this out about like creationists and evolutionists, right? One of them walks out of a jungle into a garden and says, "Oh my gosh, this garden happened by accident." The other one walks out of a jungle in the garden and says, "Oh my gosh, somebody made this garden." And the thing that they're both missing, they get an argument over it. The thing they're both missing is the garden is still real for both of them, and the jungle is still real for both of them. So just deal with that. And so whether you're a Christian or not, or a believer in anything or not, unless something is hideously wrong with you physically, in which case you have my utmost sympathies, you are okay. 3 to 4% of guys say they don't masturbate, and they've been known to lie. You're probably going to hit puberty. You're probably going to jerk off. You're probably going to be tempted by porn. These are the earthly reasons why not. And then I'm probably going to do another video later on for to talk about this from a Christian point of view if I get interest on the channel, and if not, good God, this was embarrassing enough to do the first time. so I probably won't inflict this on myself unless I have further feedback or more of a reason. And if I can figure out how to put this up on my video, awesome. If not, I'll probably have to re-record it. Heaven help me. All right. Thank you very much for my time. This has been my first ever incredibly embarrassing live stream with Bruce the Monk, and it has been about watching porn. Peace.